Welcome to my channel. This video is about melt and pour soap elements or embeds, tips and tricks how to make them, how to color them, and some ideas on how to use them. Here you can see different types of silicone molds that you can actually use for embeds. Some of them are made specifically for soap, like this one here from Brambleberry. Then you have other ones that you can find just in a normal shop. Here you have a funny one with some coffee beans, and then you can also find a large variety on Amazon. For example, there is a company called Silicomart, very good quality silicone molds for chocolate makers, so that's something that I would recommend absolutely. And then you can find some small molds also in your local shop, like these here, for example, are ice cube trays. What I like to use to make my embeds is clear melt and pour, so I chop it up in small pieces so the melting process will be easier and faster. For melting, you can of course use a microwave. If you do so, please use short increments so that you don't burn your soap. But I like to use a double boiler. You can just add water to it and then you can melt your soap on a low heat. I find that if you melt your soap on low heat, it tends to sweat less. There are different types of colorants that you can use to color your melt and pour soap. The first one I'm going to show here is if you're using a pigment, then you want to disperse your pigment in rubbing alcohol before you add it to your soap. Just give it a quick mix until it looks a little something like this, and then here you can see I add it to the melt and pour soap. Give it a stir. I like to use a whisk whenever I want to mix colorant into my melt and pour soap because I think that it works very well. And then you can still add a little more if you want to, if you are not happy with how strong your soap is colored, but you can never take it back, so it's good to add it little by little. Give it another quick mix until you're happy that your soap is colored the way you wanted it to. Another color possibility is of course micas. They come in very different vibrant colors, and the good thing about mica is that you can add it directly into your melt and pour soap. You can use a whisk to incorporate it very well, and if you see that there are still some clumps, then you can use rubbing alcohol to break the clumps. Another possibility are also glitters. I like to keep them in salt and pepper shakers, so it's very easy to add them to your soap. Once your soap is colored, you're ready to pour it into your molds, and the use of a container with a spout makes your pouring much easier. If you see some little air bubbles on top of your soap, you can just spritz it away with rubbing alcohol. Allow your soap embeds to completely cool and harden up at room temperature. I find that adding your melt and pour soap to the fridge will tend to make it sweat. When using clear melt and pour soap, you will get a very vibrant color when you add any type of colorant. But let's say you wanted to have a more opaque or pastel-y kind of look, you can add titanium dioxide to your colorant. Just mix up very well, and then you can see here you get this more pastel-y kind of look. And in this situation you want to apply the same principle. You add little by little, because you can always add more as opposed to taking it back. And then you pour it just like you would with any type of embed, and you allow it again to cool and completely harden up before unmolding. Giving a spritz with rubbing alcohol on top will get rid of the air bubbles and make a smooth finish. Sometimes when you have to pour in very small cavities, it is a bit difficult, and maybe you will find that you are over pouring, but don't worry about it. I'm gonna show you a trick how you can handle this in just a second. Another possibility for very small cavities is the use of a pipette. Makes it less messy and more precise. Now let's say you have this situation here where you over poured. You just let it harden completely, and then you take a knife and you eliminate the excess. You won't notice anything when you are unmolding the little soaps. Whenever you are unmolding your melt and pour soap from an embed mold or any type of mold really, you really want to make sure that your soap is completely cool to the touch and rock hard. This will make the unmolding really easy. If you want your embeds to have different colors, use a pipette to color the section you want to. Give it a spritz with rubbing alcohol, allow it to cool it a little bit, and then fill the rest of the mold with a different color. And now we're gonna have a look how this turned out. I used the same technique with the pipette to color this differently, and this was actually a nice cube tray that I found in a dollar store, and I thought it was so cool. And then I made these little fruits here that were actually a project for a kid's soap. I wanted to show you some types of silicone molds that were done on real fruits, let's say, and these are really very interesting, a very interesting consistency, but it makes the melt and pour soap really look like realistic fruits. I'm going to show you an example here. This is the raspberry mold, and depending on how you color it, of course, they can really look like real raspberries. And you have blueberries and strawberries. Here you can see different types that I used on a cold process soap cupcake. Let's say you wanted to add a drizzle to your soap balls here, or truffles. You would just take a pipette with some melt and pour and just drizzle it over, and then it will give you the look of like a drizzled truffle. You could also take some embeds and put them into your melt and pour. So just add it to the cavity, give it a spritz with rubbing alcohol, and then add your melt and pour soap, and then it will turn out a little bit something like this. If you want your soap embeds to be placed on a specific spot, then you can just add them to a thin layer on the bottom, spritz it with rubbing alcohol, and then gently add the melt and pour around the embed. The next example here is a combination of melt and pour in cold process soap, and I had different colors of gumballs here that I made for a galaxy type of soap, and then you can just add the embeds into your cold process soap, making sure that the trace is thick enough so it can hold the embeds so that they don't just fall to the bottom, and then it will look a little bit something like this after the cut. These are some little soap cocktails using embeds in it, and this project you can find on my channel here as well. These are some macaron melt and pour embeds, and I wanted to have a piping in between made of cold process soap. And the way you do that is you give a spritz with a rubbing alcohol to the one half of the macaron. Then you would pipe your cold process soap in between, and then you can basically sandwich your macarons and have a nice embed. You can also use your soap embeds for other projects than soap. As you can see here, this is a sugar scrubber. I used the coffee beans as a decoration. Or as you can see here, for this special Valentine's Day sugar scrub project. The next example here is a very special one. It's also a mix of cold process soap and melt and pour. You can see the black cube is a cold process soap, and then the colored little cubes are melt and pour, and I wanted to mimic the Rubik Cube. That was like an iconic game of the 80s as part of a collaboration where we had to recreate some memories, and this is how you can do it. A very interesting type of embeds is made by column molds. As you can see here, they come in different shapes and forms. Some of them I got from Brambleberry, some of them you can find on Amazon, and I will leave a link down in the description box below where you can find it. And then you basically add it to a jug, like so. Then you fill your melt and pour in it. You wait until it completely cools, and then you can unmold your soap out of the mold by opening the mold like so. You see, this is how it turns out. That's a star shape here. And one possibility how you can use it is, of course, throughout your soap loaf. In this case, you would just cut it to size to fit your mold. You can also use a cold process soap for it. If you have to correct it, just use a correcting tool. Here's a little butterfly. Well, then I had some flower molds, and I wanted to add a center in a different color, so I added a straw to it. Then I removed the straw. I put the flower into the mold again, add my mold into a jug, and then fill the center with white soap. I had a project where I used 3 of these different type of color molds, and here you can see the result. Here is another project for an Independence Day, and I took my little stars, dipped them into the melt and pour to stick them to the top layer, and then I just took a pipette to add the color in between the stars. Makes the pouring really very precise. And then this is how it turned out. This is another example here. It's a project that I actually made for school children, and I wanted to include some eraser toys to the soap so that when the children are done with the soap, they get to use the eraser toy. So you add just a thin layer at the bottom, that is the base where you can then glue your toys on, so to speak. You give it a spritz with rubbing alcohol, you allow it to cool, and then you take your eraser toy, spritz it with rubbing alcohol again. This acts like a glue. Then you dip it into the melt and pour so that you can fix it so it can stand alone, let's say. And you do that with all your little eraser toys, and then you just add and fill the entire cube. You allow it to cool, and then you can unmold it, and it will look a little bit something like this. Because melt and pour soap has the tendency to sweat, because glycerin is attracting moisture to it, I advise you to use a dehumidifier so you can prevent sweating. All the items and equipment that I'm using are linked in the description down below. I also have an Amazon store where I recommend some things, so you can go and check it out there. Another little tip that I want to give you is to store your molds in clear, transparent boxes so you can easily find them when you are looking for them. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you're interested in more videos about soap making or skincare DIY, be sure to subscribe to my channel. Please give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and I hope to see you very soon around here for another video. In the meantime, I wish you a wonderful day. Bye bye!